Geoengineering, fighting global warming by putting a chemical dust in the atmosphere and reflecting harmful radiation back into space.
We take geoengineering to mean deliberate, large-scale intervention in the Earth system.
There are a variety of schemes that have been discussed for geoengineering. A classic example is injecting reflecting particles into Earth orbit.
Nevertheless, there might be some good reasons to think about alumina. It turns out, first of all, there's been a lot of work on the environmental consequences of alumina in the stratosphere. The big deal really is that alumina has 4 times the volumetric rate of forcing for small particles as does sulfur. And that means you have 4 times less surface area for the same rate of forcing. And this is a much bigger deal. You have roughly 16 times less the coagulation rate. And that's the thing that really drives removal. So you could get away, we think, with much smaller mass fluxes.
So that's why we see things like in the used aircraft patent from '89, they talk about aluminum. And that's why we're seeing in the surface water samples aluminum. And here's David Keith saying that aluminum has 4 times the reflective volume surface area. So they'd like us to think that we're talking about sulfur, but here they slipped up and let it out that aluminum is 4 times better to achieving their ends, and it sounds like it's when they don't want us to know the effects of it.
The little picture is from a nanofabrication study, which shows you can make very high quality, and do this in just a jet in a very simple way, make high quality alumina particles just by spraying aluminum vapor out, which oxidizes. So it's certainly in principle possible to do that. There's a big literature that's already looked at that. And you could do that by either building new versions of these aircraft or even re-engineering existing aircraft. So there's some ideas of that. So you go to an engineering firm and you want this done. They don't say this is hard or unusual. They say, okay, yes, we could do it. Aerosol geoengineering looks like it is so cheap that the cost is basically not going to be an issue. That means that implementation decisions will be risk-to-risk decisions. The risk of doing it against the risk of not doing it. And it makes the problem of how we govern it fundamentally harder and different and novel. So I've told you this cheap to deliver materials in stratosphere, and I'm convinced that's true. I don't think that will change. But I think the more we do research, the less easy this will look, the more complicated the environmental effects will look. And that's a good thing, because right now it looks too easy. So I think that if we do more research, we're likely to find out that it's harder and more complicated than we thought, and that the side effects are harder to manage, and that's a healthy outcome that will make it easier to do the management. Of course, the opposite reaction is possible. It's an empirical question how people will actually react to knowledge about this. Another reaction is to say, if these crazy scientists are so concerned about putting CO2 in the atmosphere, they want to think about these things, then that might actually mean we should be more serious about the risks of CO2 in the atmosphere. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids.
What would be the effects of these materials on human health if they came down into the stratosphere?
That spraying 10 to 20 megatons of aluminum, as you said, would have no human health effects. He took a deep breath and he swallowed and he said, let me be more careful here.
We haven't done anything serious on alumina, and so there could be something terrible that we'll find tomorrow we haven't looked at.
Geoengineering is about, when you're environmentally doing something with the atmosphere, is that you can be engaged in weather modification. Historically, weather modification in the United States began to be looked upon in the 1940s as something that people would want to do. And so they started looking at making it enhancing snow, enhancing rain. They started looking at hurricane control. There was a whole bunch of projects in the 40s that started. One was Project Storm Fury, which turned into a disaster when they tried to modify a hurricane.
For the better part of 30 years, I worked in the aerospace and defense industry. Had a secret clearance twice during my career. Some of the technology that I saw or participated in the creation of tends to play a role in some of the things that are used to control the weather. The very distribution process is being employed in the aerosol campaign, manipulating the weather, crops, taking over the food production or controlling the food production. The military applications, the process evolved when they realized in the 1800s that you can put things into the environment that will influence the uptake of moisture and where it drops out of the atmosphere again.
So I was a television weatherman for 20 years. These chemtrails are absolutely required to impact whatever weather event they were designing. And the trails were an absolute necessary ingredient for them to achieve their weather modification goals. So we're finding the aerosols, the
metal particulates. All of those can be used and leveraged to create weather events that are several standard deviations or outside what would be typically normal. When the geoengineering really got underway with the Russians in the mid-70s, we ended up with snow in Miami.
Since the early 1990s, it's been partially declassified, I'm about to go over it, that major Western governments have been secretly adding to jet fuel a whole host of radioactive isotopes, aluminum dioxide, the list goes on and on, to manipulate the weather on this planet. And when the general public brings it up, they just say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, despite the fact that most of this is hiding in plain view. They kept the Manhattan Project secret. They kept the Tuskegee experiment secret. They've kept literally hundreds of different projects secret until the establishment feels like telling us they were doing it later. In the public documents dealing with weather manipulation, geoengineering, or terraforming, they say it's being done for our own good and to repair the atmosphere. But the scientists, meteorologists, astrophysicists, and others that I've talked to have said what they're spraying and releasing would actually eat holes in the atmosphere and damage the soils of the planet. So let me now race through for you the over 50 or so documents I have here in front of us admitting the geoengineering program that's going on. Council on Foreign Relations, 2008, geoengineering workshop on planetary scale geoengineering. This is already going on. It's a multi-hundred-page report. Go read it. Admitting this is going on. But then they make jokes on the nightly news when I talk about this. Here's another report out of Wired magazine. Earth's dimming skies before and after. Admitting that condensation trails from jet aircraft since the early 1990s has dimmed the planet upwards of 30%. That's from 2009. Pretty darn important. Here's another article. Can 1 million tons of sulfur dioxide combat climate change? That's their cover for this, and Bill Gates gets billions in taxpayer money a year to carry out these secret projects. He's just one part of it. Here's an Infowars.com article with the link to the National Patent Office. Spraying the Skies, 1975, U.S. patent for powdered contrail generation. And you look at what they're releasing now in the atmosphere, what's being picked up, it's exactly that. The airlines don't even know. It's at the major jet fuel manufacturers. There's more than 50 patents on this alone for geoengineering. BBC, you notice I'm going through one stack here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 more stacks. BBC, why the sun seems to be dimming. Man-made chemtrails. This is a key article from the Pentagon. Weather as a force multiplier, owning the weather by 2025, 1996. Dealing with manipulation of the weather. Department of Defense weather programs, breaking down the control of hurricanes, everything that's been going on since the 60s, declassified in 2004. Ben Livingston, the father of weather weapons, was interviewed on radio and TV by me. Report, oral evidence taken before the Science and Technology Committee, 2010, in Congress, dealing with the geoengineering that's going on. Here's another, unilateral geoengineering. Briefing notes. Again, this is put out by Stanford University, who first certified the weather control in 1968 with Ben Livingston, not declassified till the mid-2000s. Let's continue to another key document, indirect and semi-direct aerosol campaign. This is put out by the federal government and more than a dozen major universities, dealing with how they are manipulating the weather currently and controlling it. You notice all the droughts, the rest of it. Just like I told you how the 1992, a Nobel Prize was won by Paul Crutzen on how to control the weather worldwide with these systems, okay? And you read what he got the prize for. Turned out this was work he did decades before. His plan got implemented. He won the prize because he claims it's to fix the ozone holes. Why aren't you telling the public then about this project if it's supposedly to fix the ozone holes? We've interviewed the physicists, the atmospheric experts. It's pure bull. They're changing our atmosphere. House of Commons, Science and Technology Committee, the regulation of geoengineering, 2010, calling for banning it, talking about how dangerous it is. There's UN treaties on it from 1979. But again, none of this exists, even though I'm giving you all the documentation. I told you in 1996 that the NSA spy grids were to be able to predict the future and mass movements and rig economies. Snowden told you that last year. I'm on record. I know what I'm talking about. We've done our homework. Here's another one put out by Harvard. Stratospheric injection of reflectic aerosols on particles by means of aviation fuel additives. Bam. That's how they're compartmentalizing it, where people don't know what's happening. Cirrus cloud seeding using airliners to reduce reflectivity and, quote, save us from the sun as the Earth actually gets less light and plants begin to die. All mainline government reports. The Air Force breaking it down, all the rest of it, and separately then the Air Force comes out and whitewashes it and just says it's ice crystals. No, we know there's natural ice crystals at high altitudes that form. We're not saying it's all weather modification. The point is the weather modification is going on. You can search it. You can watch C-SPAN where they've had hearings admitting all of it. This is the reality. And you ignore all of this at your total peril. The globalists have created a breakaway civilization. They have created a technocracy. They're playing God. In places like Dubai years ago, they admitted they could control their weather and make it rain and turn the desert green. But here, they don't tell you that a lot of the so-called Doppler towers are really weather control towers. And I was told that in 1999 by a top engineer in microwaves, and didn't even believe it when he gave me the documents, and then years later saw it in the Daily Mail and the Associated Press. But in the Middle East and China, not here. They're doing it with jet trails, with the chemicals. They're doing it with these different microwave systems and relay towers that then resonate with it. They've got over-the-horizon radar is one reason they're spraying this stuff. The point is we need to know. The public needs to have an investigation. This is hardcore, serious info that government, using our tax money and our ingenuity, has built a breakaway civilization where they put stuff in our water, GMO in our food, they're messing with the weather, they're buying armored vehicles and billions of rounds of ammo and have TV shows bad-mouthing the founding fathers.
People-oriented solutions to global warming.
There's never enough time, but you have to find the solutions. And to use the excuse of immediacy and urgency to take the wrong action is not a solution. In terms of time, we do organic farming, and again in my book Soil Not Oil, we've shown that a localized ecological biodiverse system of farming could solve 40% of the climate problem, because 40% emissions are coming from food miles, nitrogen oxide emissions, cutting down the Amazon forest, all linked to a globalized industrialized food system. Tomorrow we can do that. In 3 years' time, all of the world's farming could be ecological, absorbing the carbon dioxide and putting fertility back in the soil. It's not a 50-year experiment. It's a assured, guaranteed path that has been shown to work, and it does three things for you. It reduces emissions while increasing food security and food productivity, and increasing water security, because soils rich in carbon and organic matter are the best reservoir of water. But I want to just mention, actually there's, just as there are a group of scientists who are panicking because of their reductionist approach, I'm a scientist. The reason I do ecology today is because I realized science was just shrinking in terms of the knowledge an individual gets in a particular stream. And so many of the narrow expertise is where you're getting this panic because they don't know there are other solutions.
A meter is 1/billionth of a meter. It's very small. In fact, if you have particles, say, that are 40 or 50 nanometers across, you can take and line 50 of them up next to a single red blood cell. These things are extremely tiny. They're pervasive.
The collapse and decrease of agriculture is something I worry about even more than the previous info about autism and Alzheimer's.
Believe me, I'm seriously concerned with what I'm watching. As a wildlife biologist, I've been watching the ecosystem collapse. When you lose all your stream organisms, when you have aluminum overload in your streams, you're killing your microbial bacteria and you're disrupting the entire ecosystem. So it goes way beyond just a little bit of pollution. How did Monsanto No, to create aluminum-resistant plants. I don't think I've heard anybody ask that question. Okay.
Insects. I've done studies in Siskiyou County. They're at 20% of normal. The aquatic insects basically made a nosedive in 2006 to about 20% of normal. So far this year, I've sampled 200 trout stomachs. 98% of them are empty.
Silvery white skies toward the horizon in the morning in the east, in the afternoon in the west. Skies should be blue, not silvery white. And the bottom line is, even when you don't see the horizon to horizon trails, we are absolutely still being sprayed. When you see even the shorter, bright trails, still aerosol disbursement. I challenge anybody, look at the high bypass turbofan jet engine, which is all tankers and all commercial carriers. 80% of the air that passes through that engine is non-combusted. That engine by design is almost incapable of making any type of trail. So when you see the silvery white skies still being sprayed, the horizon to horizon trails are the tip of the iceberg for these programs. Alzheimer's and autism, the common link, aluminum exposure. There's a mountain of aluminum coming down on us. It's accumulating in all of us. We have statements from internationally recognized neuroscientists like Dr. Russell Blaylock stating that these particulates enter right through our lung lining, go right into our bloodstream, where they build up in our systems like a plaque. Tomorrow we have one of the top neurologists in Northern California speaking about this issue. He's being inundated with patients that are now becoming cognitively dysfunctional, Alzheimer's and autism, or excuse me, Alzheimer's and dementia. 1 in 3 seniors now dies with Alzheimer's and or dementia. Not dies from it, but dies with it. But many are dying from Alzheimer's now. It's going absolutely off the charts. Autism, 10,000% increase in the last 50 years. 1 in 50 children now dies again, or excuse me, now has autism. So that's the kind of increases we're seeing are absolutely cataclysmic. Prevalence of Alzheimer's disease, that graph's not hard to figure out. It's going through the roof. It can't not go through the roof. There's a direct cause and effect happening here, and we are not speculating about